Hello and welcome to the Doc Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mike DeLuke, and it's my mission to help you lead a happier, healthier, and more prosperous life, both personally and professionally. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Doc Podcast. Today I'm joined by dental hygienist and entrepreneur, Lorne Gueits. Lorne is a prominent figure in the dental industry, leveraging over 30 years of experience to revolutionize disease prevention and airway health. Lorne has lectured regionally and nationally at events such as the Greater New York Dental Meeting and the Invisalign Summit. She was instrumental in creating the Align Hygiene Faculty and Invisalign Clinical Learn for dental hygienists. She's also the recipient of the peer-awarded Align Technology Leadership Award. In 2018, Lorne founded Airway Health Solutions and serves as its CEO. She continues to advocate for oral and airway health through her roles as guest faculty at NYU and as a board member for the Children's Airway First Foundation. Lorne has led an amazing career in the dental profession, and we're going to talk about that and much more during today's episode. And with that, I would like to welcome Lorne Gueits to the Doc Podcast. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much, Dr. DeLuke. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I have so much I want to get to. We've kind of become fast friends here in the past couple months as our comparable missions have kind of joined forces, and I'm excited for what lies ahead for us as well. Before we get down the path of talking a lot about what we had an amazing weekend recently at a leadership conference that you organized, and we're going to talk about that in great detail. Before we go down and get into kind of the nitty gritty of the X's and O's of where you're working on, what your mission is, and where you're focused going forward, let's just take a step back. You have a really interesting, awesome story and journey. And I love interesting stories and journeys. I find it's really relatable to people because so many people out there see where someone is at and they can't conceptualize. It's just beyond our comprehension to say, well, they didn't start there. We just kind of think, well, yeah, that's what they've always wanted to do and kind of end up there. But you did not start in this arena. And so take me back, going way back to
way back.
You were just trying to figure out what you wanted to do for a career in life and where that all went from there.
Sure. Well, it actually started as a dental patient. I mean, I was 15 years old, and somehow the dentist at the time asked me if I was interested in being a dental assistant. And I was kind of flabbergasted because I never thought about it. I'm 15. I'm actually working in McDonald's. I'm trying to get up to crew trainer status. You know, there's like that little extra patch that you get for being a crew trainer. So I was working diligently towards that. I guess that's my corporate kind of climb the ladder drive at 15. So it sounded interesting to me. And actually the hourly rate, if I recall, I hate to age myself, but I'm going to, it was like 1985, and I think it was like $6 an hour.
Wow.
And I was making $3.35 at McDonald's. So I was like, okay, let me just
good deal. Yeah, right. Step it up.
So I just showed up. That's kind of the theme that I have going along of any advice that when people ask me is just show up. So I showed up, but I was overwhelmed. I was 15. I had no dental background. I didn't really deal with adults like that where I'm trying to make them more comfortable. It's always been the other way around, as you know, that awkward age of 15. So I quit after 2 weeks. I just felt nervous. I had imposter syndrome, and I was just so happy to go back to my drive-through window, feeling in my comfort zone, right? And then 1987, I didn't have enough money for my prom to get a limo. So my mom, God bless her, she was like, you know what, Lauren, get another job. I'm like, okay. So I looked in the penny saver, and I found a job for a waitress at a country club. And then ironically, the same thing happened. I was waiting on this nice family, and he was a dentist, and he asked me if I ever considered dental assisting.
Come on.
And how funny is that, Mike, that here I am now 16 and a half or so. And I already did that as a career choice. And I'm like, no, I'm not interested. It wasn't for me. You know, like,
and you didn't know this guy. Did you know he was a dentist at that time, or?
I got to know that he was a dentist,
okay.
But it was he just said I had a way with people that he felt like they would feel comfortable coming into the operatory. So I told him my experience. He goes, well, it sounds like you didn't get the proper training.
Mm.
So he assured me that he would, and that's what happened. I took a chance. I think I bumped it up $1, if I recall. Knowing me, right? Like, okay, now I have a little leverage here.
That's
So
great.
so yeah, so that lasted. I worked for him from 2007 all through dental hygiene school. So dental hygiene was a natural progression for me because I really enjoyed patient care. I enjoyed holding the hand of the lady in the waiting room, to take her into the seat. I
Mm.
love just making people feel more comfortable and just brightening up their day because everyone had these phobias. So I also love being in charge and a step ahead of the procedures that I felt really important.
Mm.
That I had an important job to do, that I was one step ahead of everything. So it was mentally stimulating, and it also fulfilled that feeling of helping people,
Mm.
just in their daily life. So I graduated from dental hygiene school, Farmingdale at Long Island. I know
Mm-hmm.
you're well aware of it.
Yep.
And that was 1991. I originally wanted to go to dental school. That would have been my next step. But then I got married at 92 and I had 3 kids. And then, it's a whole different pathway, which I've
Mm-hmm.
always loved being a dental hygienist, though. I still do. I actually stopped working clinically 2020, March 13th, that Friday the
Oh,
13th.
okay. So after COVID, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually went back after because I missed it and I wanted to get my hands wet more so in the airway space and have those compelling conversations
Okay.
about airway, not
Okay.
just what it could be like, but what it would be like.
Interesting. Yeah. So, we talk a lot on this show about messages and signs and recognizing them, whatever someone believes in, God, universe, spirits, power. But think about those signs. Something was calling you to
Yes.
this. I mean, and now look at all the lives you're changing and impacting. If you hadn't had those two people say that to you, or they hadn't happened just like, or you hadn't listen, right? You could have just been like, whatever,
Yes.
I'm busy and I'm not looking to change. But you saw the signs. And I feel like we all get those signs and we miss some.
Mm-hmm.
And I think our job a lot of times is to try to recognize some of those signs and say, maybe that someone's trying to tell me something here, that I have to fulfill my purpose and what is my true calling. And you might not find out right away. It might take you another 30 years to really find it, but it sounds like you knew it actually pretty quickly, along that journey. Now, how did you? We have an interesting connection too, as we've been talking.
Mm-hmm.
I went to Stony Brook for dental school, and Dr. Golub and Dr. Ryan, Lorne Golub and Maria Ryan, were faculty members of mine when I was there. And I was reading up in a great article, which I can put a link to in the show
Sure.
notes, that was done on you recently, and it references them, and I'm reading it going like, no way. What are
Yep.
the chances now? So tell me about how you got involved with them in Periostat.
Sure. So basically, I was fascinated always by comprehensive care and getting to the root cause, and it
Mm-hmm.
evolved over my 30 years of clinical hygiene. But the first part of it was really that oral systemic connection. And Alice McEnany, the same person, was a rep for Periostat, and she came to the office and she was showing me the science and what it could do for my patients. I worked in the perioprosto office, so we really specialized, in perio, obviously, but many times I would see my patients 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks. So it was a really tight schedule, and I
Mm.
couldn't believe the improvements with that low dosage doxycycline. So I just got to know everybody. You know me, I'm curious. So
Mm.
I wanted to go to Stony Brook. I met Dr. Lorne Golub. He's amazing.
He is an amazing guy. Yeah.
And he's so, uh, he's just one of my heroes. He really, really took the time to meet with me and show me how it works, answer any questions. And he was thrilled to see his work then clinically.
Mm.
So I would share with him my patients and how they actually improved over
Yeah.
time using his medication. So that was a natural connection. It was called Lorne and Lauren. It's like the Lorne and Lauren show, and he became like a friend. Which
Mm.
it's you have these people on these pedestals, and then you realize just how down to earth they are and how they really just want people to learn and improve. So that he was such a mentor of mine. And then Dr. Maria Ryan, we actually co-lectured together at the American Diabetes Educators
Mm.
platform, and nobody understood why a dental hygienist and a dentist was lecturing to the Diabetes Association.
This
So
is about when,
that
would you say, time-wise?
this was like 2011 or so,
Okay.
around there.
Okay.
And I actually wrote an article in RDH magazine on the dynamic duo, which is the dental hygienist and the diabetes educator, which was Donna Jornze. And we just teamed up, and it's like sister colleagues, because we all see our patients probably more frequently than the prospective doctors. And then also there's so much care involved as these healthcare professionals. You know, I think like RDH is, you're really delivering healthcare. And once you have that perspective, you will never get bored, and you will find an office where you can thrive and help your patients thrive.
That's awesome. Bunch of things you said there that I want to touch on.
Yeah, sure.
I
We're
love.
fast talkers
I
too.
know. I always, that's one of my biggest struggles always. But no, you weren't speaking too quickly at all. It's just, there's a lot of great information there that you really had an interesting journey. And a few of the things you said really resonate with me. And that is that you were always getting at the cause of things. You always wanted to know the why. You weren't satisfied with it. And RDH being really delivering healthcare. I think it's just, again, you think of things, and I noticed that this past weekend when we were at that conference, your mind works in a really unique and interesting way. And I mean that as a total positive, because you're not satisfied with just what things seem at face value, and you push into that, but in a very responsible and respectful way, to try to get to the root cause. And I would guess that's why you gravitated towards someone like Dr. Golub and someone like Dr. Ryan. They're thinkers, and they're deep thinkers, but they're very communicative as well. They're not just people who sit in a research lab, they're clinicians. So what is it, do you think, in you that makes you so curious to try to get to the root cause of this? Your passion for diabetes care and making that connection, because a lot of people in hygiene will just say, oh, yep, I'm basically there. I just do my job and cleaning teeth and going, just like a lot of dentists just kind of think, or, I just go in and I do my restorative, or I do my crowns, and they don't necessarily maybe see the bigger picture of this. So how do you see the bigger picture? What is it in you that allows you to do that?
It's inborn. It's almost like, well, we opened up the leadership summit with the Airway Avengers, and everyone kind of has a superpower. And I think curiosity was just one of my natural born. I think it's a gift, actually, because you can't pretend to be curious. It's just, you just either are or you're not. And you can ask my mom. Probably my first word wasn't no, it was why. It was like, why? But why, mommy? I mean, I can actually remember saying it, but why, mommy? Like, even to the point where one of my first memories was in kindergarten, and I'm writing on this notebook, right? You have paper, and I'm like, well, where did this come from? Where did paper come from? And my mom's like, it came from a tree. And my 4-year-old brain couldn't put it together.
Right.
And there's no Google back then.
Right, sure.
It's not like, so we literally went to the library, and I can remember the smell of the plastic and the crinkling of that, thick covering, that's kind of yellow.
Of course.
And,
oh, yeah.
Right. And right, I'm talking about. So
yeah, you got to be our age. No, there's a lot of people
remembered,
listening like, wait, what?
I know. So the Gen Xers and above will remember, but it's that curiosity where I needed to see the tree. I don't know why. It's just kind of innate, and I'm really blessed that I'm able to kind of have a platform to share the complexity of science and break it down simply so patients and professionals can understand it and integrate it. Because I like the simplicity of everything. Albert Einstein is one of my all-time favorites. In fact, my family knows I actually have a crush on Albert Einstein. So that's a little tidbit, So because I love the way he thinks. He's the ultimate like curiosity agent. So I'm a curiosity agent, and I'm glad that people are also curious, or else it'd be very lonely for me.
Yeah, no, well, I'm glad you are too, because you're doing amazing things and out of your curiosity, and then you have the dedication and drive and intellect to back it up. Just curiosity. It's great. It can take you that first step, but you back it up in a lot of ways. And I've always been impressed in the time I've known you of just your ability to coordinate different things going on and take those calculated risks. And clearly throughout your career, you have. What do you find as you've gone along your journey you've been in different areas. And one of the things that I find a lot of listeners and a lot of docs I coach, and even just people that listen that aren't in the medical or dental profession, we see where someone's at, and it's hard for us to conceptualize how they got there. And I think people feel like our trajectory has to be linear. I think people feel like it's a gradual progression to get to an end point. We don't always even know what that end point is. Success is however we want to define it. We just don't take the time to acknowledge, I feel, that it's not there's going to be ups and downs. There's going to be bumps. You said it yourself. Your first experience in this profession was not a good one, and you could have run from it. And when that second doc said something to you, just totally been like, I'm not even going to give this another shot because I know it doesn't work. And it's such an important lesson. I just want to make reference to that again, is that sometimes our failures, sometimes the things that we don't think are going well are a part of our path and a part of our journey, and to keep on that, going down that road and look to where it's led you. And then the next thing I want to touch on is, as you were in that journey, you were focusing a lot on diabetes and with the delivery with Periostat. How did it transition into something that tied into airway? Was it something that happened while you were in practice? Was it just something you heard? And were you starting to do things in your hygiene practice relative to the airway side of things?
So it's interesting because remember I mentioned the Periostat rep, Alice McEnany.
Yeah.
She left Periostat and then became a rep for Invisalign. So we had a great relationship. And then if she validated clear aligner therapy, then I wanted to listen because I trusted her. So she would come in and show me all these different cases, and all of a sudden, my curious mind was exploded when I saw some of the before and after of just what clear aligner can do in an expansive manner. So I went to the courses and I sat there and I couldn't believe what happens when you think ortho first. And I know Dr. Rouse referenced that in your last podcast, but because it was always perio first, perio. In fact, I recall in 1999, the first Invisalign fundamentals course was at the Greater New York Dental Meeting, I believe, in Manhattan. And Jonathan Richter, who I worked for, he's a Penn Perio Prosto grad. He's like, why don't you go and check that out? I'm like, I don't do ortho. Like, that's not, you do ortho, I do perio. I'm going to save the world with caries and caries prevention, perio prevention, and oral cancer screening. You do that. So it really did like a full like change or makeover of how I thought about ortho once I saw the cases. And that's the bottom line, Dr. DeLuca, is seeing is believing. So people have to kind of see for themselves to believe. You can hear all these anecdotes, but once you see the cases and you get to know the patients behind the cases and their improvements, it becomes addicting in a sense, because that's where I said I really wanted to shout it from the mountaintop, the health benefits of clear aligner therapy, because I wasn't aware of them. I wasn't taught them. And it's not something that to this day, I don't think they teach in the curriculum, but it's so beneficial that I wanted everyone to know about it.
Wow. And as you kept going down the aligner path, then you started, because of the expansive concept, that started to tie more into the airway side as you were going down that road?
So it took a little while, actually. So there was a good chunk of time where I was just all about orthodontics, clear aligners, not even knowing about airway. So much so that the case trajectory in my office went through the roof. Believe me, Dr. Richter was very happy.
Yeah, he recommended that meeting to you.
His aligner practice went like 100-fold, and he's like, just keep doing what you're doing. And the patients were happy, and we got more referrals. And then I started speaking for like some small roundtables, because as you know, public speaking isn't easy. It's nice to kind of build up that confidence and your presentation on what you want to relate to the profession. So I started with roundtable discussions, and what happened was I got the attention of Invisalign because they were seeing what I was doing, the cases I was doing. A sales position opened up in 2012. And I would work directly with Alice as a specialist. And we had a great relationship. She goes, Lauren, why don't you put your hat in the ring? And I'm like, that fear. And I'm like, I don't have any sales experience. This is medical device sales. This is the top of the top. This is not, it's above pharma sales. It's the most coveted job, especially on the North Shore of Long Island, as you can imagine, right? It's a
Yeah.
coveted territory.
Yeah.
So I just showed up, I applied, and I was able to get the position. And
Wow.
I think what really convinced them was that I was in sales. I have been in sales, but I'm in sales for patients' health and prevention of disease. And when I can actually, because I had my own business within a business, show them the trajectory of my numbers and then of the patients who are getting better as well, it's a win-win scenario. So that led me into Align Technology in the door as a sales rep. So now I'm a rep, and I'm working for Eric Carlson, whose son was actually one of those cases that you saw being presented
Oh,
at the
really?
summit.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, is
The
that the
Christmas
one where
card.
they were saying like,
Yep.
yeah, you send the Christmas card? Oh my gosh. Okay.
So we can get to
Wow.
that
Okay.
story in a
Interesting. Yeah.
moment. But
Yeah.
so yeah, so he was my boss, and he was wonderful. But he was coming on my sales calls, and he was seeing how I was relating to the hygienist and the team by educating, not by selling, by really showing them how to create value from the hygiene chair, and how this is a solution. This isn't a fad. This is an absolute solution that they can, once it's almost like you have to offer this as an option, right? You can't, it's one thing not to know, but once you can't not know anymore. So
Yeah.
I feel like it's your professional obligation and responsibility to at least give the option to your patients of the utmost and comprehensive care. So that's what I did. And they asked me then to speak at regional meetings. They tailored the PowerPoint presentations to what I was doing. And then there was a demand for me to speak to other regions, and I couldn't keep up with my territory, right? So I was asked to speak at the Invisalign Summit. And after I gave my presentation at the GP Summit for the first time and kind of went back to basics, like the teeth should be sliding and not colliding, and teeth that fit together properly last longer, and really getting down to basics and showing before and after. Joe Hogan, the CEO of Align, I thought he was walking towards me. It almost was like a dream, because he's like a celebrity, when you have a sales meeting, the CEO, it's almost like, he'll never come to me, So I saw it was like he's getting closer and closer and closer. And then all of a sudden he's right in front of me, and I'm like kind of starstruck. And he goes, Lorne, he goes, I just have to thank you so much. He goes, because now it makes sense to me. I'm an engineer. So I get it. Teeth are colliding, not sliding. He pulled his cheek back and he showed me his lingual inclination. And that's why he has the recession and the abfractions and the clefting. And then he said, thank you so much. That made sense to me. See, the simplicity of it sometimes is what many people tend to miss when they're teaching, or perhaps giving these chairside conversations, is just to bring it down to the lowest common denominator.
Yeah, that's another great point, is we overcomplicate things all the time. And it's a real gift to be able to take complex topics and break them down into a way that is easily understood and digested by people who don't have your level of knowledge or acumen. And clearly that is something that you are talented at. And I mean, I can speak for sure that Joe's not probably walking up to everybody who speaks. So he definitely saw something in you that he recognized that you have an ability to do that. And so after you were going with Invisalign for a while and getting deeper in, what led you to have this feeling that you needed to or wanted to seek out something entrepreneurial? Because at this point you'd been primarily working under other people, and now we're talking what, about mid 20 teens? Is that about right?
It's like 2000. So I got the job 2013. I started, and then I was in sales for 2 years. But then I made my own position to hygiene education manager. I pitched the
add a line.
Yeah, at Align. Okay. And that's when I created the hygiene team. And I loved the autonomy of it. I was in corporate, but it didn't feel like it, because I was on my own little island. I had my own little department. I did have a direct report, but gave me the flexibility of, I reported to a director who gave me the flexibility of just going for it. So it was corporate, but not really. It was corporate light for me. It was a good introduction. But that's where I saw Dr. Ben Moralia with the airway component to it. And And again, once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it, and
Mm.
I wanted to simplify it. And it was getting down to the nitty gritty of the last why. It was really
Yeah.
malocclusion
Yeah.
is a symptom of soft tissue dysfunction, which is a symptom. I'm going to use this term
There you
from our
go. I'm
leadership
waiting for it. Yep.
of craniofacial respiratory dystrophy.
Yep.
Right? That was the term we came up with at this leadership summit.
Yep.
So that's where the light bulb goes off. And that's where I knew, okay, we need to incorporate an airway course into Align Technology. And that's what Dr. Morali and I did with a course called Amplify, which many people know who are now alumni of Airway Health Solutions. But when we had the idea of creating an airway kind of friendly course at that time, I wouldn't say focused, but airway friendly, to kind of ease into it, we thought it was going to be like a 5-part series. Right. So we had the Amplify launched, and then there was just I had a new boss, and it just we didn't gel for lack of better words, it happens. And actually I feel like it's the biggest blessing right now. It's kind of that blessing in disguise, and don't curse the darkness. And I'm so grateful for that whole experience that I have, because I wouldn't be where I am now. I was so passionate about clear aligners and airway that I thought I would be a diehard, Align employee, to the end. So it forced me out of my comfort zone. And sometimes, there's a fork in the road, and then sometimes there's a fork that like stabs you in the gut,
Oh, I know.
Right?
I can relate. Yep.
Yeah. So that was one of those moments where it was do or die, and I'm not a dyer, that's for sure. So I'm a doer,
sure.
And, it would just take one step at a time. But like you, I believe in something bigger. And so I leaned into that spiritual side of learning from other people who, different philosophers, and kind of start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. And everything snowballs from there. It's really beautiful, the unfolding of it all, if you just keep the faith. And keeping the faith is whatever your faith is, but it's more of just realizing that it's the highs and the lows are all part of the overall journey. And I think Steve Jobs said it best with the connect the dots, where you can't make a big picture without going down, or else your picture is just one big upline. I have a very colorful and creative picture, as we all do, but I'm grateful for the lows, because then I wouldn't have the highs, and I don't see them as lows anymore, actually.
Yeah, they're just part of that journey. Dr. Brett Gilbert, who was on recently, another person I've become kind of fast friends with here through this platform. He talked about the infinity symbol, and similar to what Jobs was talking about, connecting the dots. That you sometimes you're up, then you come back down, but it doesn't mean you're crashing and falling. You just have to ride out, and then if you make the right steps, you'll be able to swoop back up and come back up again. Obviously, it's in perpetuity. That's part of why it's the infinity symbol. And I think we look at our lives a lot of times as these peaks and valleys that have to be high highs and low lows, instead of that it's this journey. And there are these ebbs and flows, as opposed to these, super high mountains and these super low valleys. And that's a really good message to just reiterate to people is, just hearing your story. There are so many points at which you could have just been like, I'm out. Like this is, not for me, or this isn't the right. And you persevered through it because of, as you were explaining, you felt in you that you, number one, had a mission and a purpose to do more. You also believed in something greater than you. And I never really intended or thought my show would talk about that side of things so much, but it's amazing how many of my guests who have persevered, who have succeeded, have also had really down, dark times, and have emerged greater and stronger, and have a belief in something greater than them, and whatever that is. And I feel like I'm getting a message from people that I talk to and interview, that there's a common thread. There's a commonality there, that people believe in that. And I'm not telling anybody what they should or have to do, or beliefs, or just, it is interesting just speaking objectively from the people with whom I speak in this platform. That is a common thread. So, because things are going to happen, tough things are going to happen to all of us. It's how we respond. And in each step of the way, you were able to look at that fork, whether it was just a fork in the road or one that was stabbing you, and say, okay, how am I going to emerge from this better? And that leads me to what came next, which is, again, maybe kind of where we were recently together at this meeting, but what came next out of that? So you Align's done.
So what came next? It's daunting when you're going at 1,000,000 miles an hour. I was traveling like 3 weeks out of a month,
Ooh,
and
wow.
my
That was with
calendar,
Align?
my calendar was jam packed, and then all of a sudden it's like open. It's almost like take the needle off the record, and it was almost like, oh my gosh, I can breathe.
Yeah.
Number one. So then I asked myself these two questions: is what would you do? I do, but I'm saying I'll do it to your audience. What would you do if you couldn't fail? Like, what would you do if there was no such thing as fear? If it was impossible to fail, what would you do? And then so that's fear, that one barrier. But the second question is, what would you do if you won the lottery? Because everyone says, oh, money is such a barrier. So if you can just remove those two obstacles and get really curious about what your passion is and how you can make a difference, I think those two questions really help direct it. So that's what I did. I did a lot of soul searching. I also gained like 30 pounds of that corporate, sitting at the desk and eating airport food. And,
sure.
So I really put my health back. Number one, I lost 30 pounds, and I'm exercising now part of my daily life. So that's just showing up for yourself. So I just was feeling better. My mood was getting better. I had the gift of time, almost like Rip Van Winkle, where you kind of have like unlimited time.
Yep.
And so I said, okay, I'm passionate about airway health. I'm passionate about comprehensive care. I'm passionate about helping people live their best, healthiest lives to breathe, sleep, and thrive. So let's get an airway program going. And Dr. Ben Moralia's teachings was all I knew at that time, which resonated with me the most because of the simplicity of it as well. So we partnered up and created Airway Health Solutions 3 months later. We launched it, and now here we are 6 years later. And sometimes I feel like Ms. Magoo, and I don't know if our listeners know Mr. Magoo, right? It's like, but
go ahead, you can explain. I probably have to, but
okay. So Mr. Magoo, it was a cartoon. It actually was in black and white when I first started watching it when I was like 3 or 4. But is as a blind man with a trusty cane, and he just keeps walking. It's almost like Finding Nemo, just keep swimming. But he's blind, and he literally has blind faith, and that's kind of how I feel, where I just keep walking. I don't know what's gonna come. It could be a pitfall, but there's always something there to lift me up and take me to the next level. It could be a different level than I expected, but it's always been okay. I've always landed on my feet. And even when I didn't think I actually did. And if you want an example of that, it's this
please.
last leadership summit that we just had this past weekend. It was the Airway Health United Leadership Summit, which I've been in the back of my mind is all these different brilliant speakers and brilliant practitioners who they may differ on techniques, but we all are united in the same goal, and that's to really have the utmost in patient care and airway health care. And really the mechanisms of how we get there, I don't want that to be a barrier of our strengths united. So that's why I created the Airway Health United Leadership Summit. But it was created because, and this is very funny, because last year I'm like, okay, we're going to go back live. We had Dr. Kevin Boyd's mini residency live, and I thought everyone would show up because we were just virtual for a long time after COVID. And I had 30 signups, 28 of them which were virtual, the virtual option. So then I had two live, and I have a hotel block that if anyone's an event planner, you have to kind of put your on the line and hope that people show up. So I was out $8,000 because we didn't fill our room block. And ask me a year ago if that was a blessing.
Probably not at that point, right?
Nothing it was a reach, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, maybe I would have gotten hit by a car or something. Like you really stretch.
Right. A hurricane would have come through Fort Lauderdale.
Yeah, maybe the plane would have crashed, whatever. But that didn't make me feel any better. But until this, when I realized I have a credit, if I have to fill an event before the year, I'm not going to do the same event over again. That's kind of insanity. So that's when I created that leadership summit idea, because I had a $5,000 credit. But the funny part, the punchline is that $5,000 credit basically paid for the sales tax of the meeting.
Because it got big.
But we all came together, and it was beautiful.
It really was. And before I get into that part, again, your persistence is just so admirable. I mean it. Like, you just don't accept no. It's so cool to see. So a lot of people can learn a lot from that, because I think especially this younger generation, not our generation, but the generations, millennials, Gen Z,
Alpha.
Now Alpha, right? And so what happens is everything to them is just been changed so much through technology, and the eyes and the lens of technology. And I almost feel like sometimes us being those kids in the yard that, like, stuff did break, stuff didn't happen right. It wasn't like we could and then we had to figure out a way to kind of fix it, because we couldn't just, go and look it up online or get a quick fix.
Right.
I think it's wiring younger generations for this quick fix mentality, that if it's not just right away, that ability to dig in deeper and realize this is part of the process, number one, and then number two, be able to actually creatively brainstorm new solutions. And it's funny, because I find this new generation is, like, so creative. They're out of bounds creative in a great way. I mean, they just think, the residents I teach and coach, they just are so bright and so creative. I do think, though, that as a general statement, even seeing my kids, their friends that age, there's less resiliency when it comes to that rejection and failure and discouragement when they receive. It feels heavier to them than I remember it feeling to our generation. We were coming up, like, we kind of knew we were going to fall off our bike and have to get the gravel picked out of our knee. Like, that was just kind of like, it was not if it was, I mean, as do I, it was not if, it was when. So I feel like it's a little different. It's interesting to see. And you're a testament to the fact that when you do keep persevering, even just that last example, which I'll get into talking about the leadership summit now, the fact that it didn't work the year before, like, this isn't meant to be, right? Or this is never going to make it. Instead, you double down and you put everything on the line for it. And this was such a great event. I'm so thankful you invited me to be a part of it. And as you said, and as some of the discussion and debate happened that day, we don't all agree. And it wasn't, some people think, like, oh, it's just, people hear airway. I call it on my show a lot of times the A word, right? Because now we'll get a little deeper into this side of things here. It's very different how general dentists, pediatric dentists, physicians, different types of physicians, orthodontists, hygienists, myofunctional therapists, we all have these different views of airway, as Kevin Boyd calls it, the much more appropriately called the craniofacial respiratory complex, because it encompasses so much more than just the airway. The airway is not isolated. In my field, a lot of times we like to kind of isolate the airway in the mouth, and we like to talk about, my field being orthodontics, that they're not really related. And we have all these debates and arguments over, does anything I do in the mouth impact the airway? And we try so hard, so many of my colleagues try so hard to prove that nothing we can do can improve or worsen airway. And we try to have all these absolutes where if you track this amount, can you impact airway? If you expand, can you impact airway? Does tongue impact airway? And we argue and debate. What I loved about this weekend was we threw all that out there, and we had ENT, dual trained ENT oral surgeon with Stanley. We had neuro with Jerry Simmons. We had Dave McCarty, who is sleep physician. We had his researcher, Ellen. I mean, we had brilliant minds in that room. I mean, I'm looking around this room. It was a group of very smart people. Then you had in the general dental arena, guys like Ben, who has amazing cases to show what he's doing with this, and has such a passion for this that he's dedicated his practice to it now. And Brian, and I mean, there's all these guys who just have this other way of seeing things. And it was interesting for me as an orthodontist, because I'm used to how I was trained, and I'm sitting here kind of fighting my community a little bit to say, guys and gals, we need to look more into this. We got to be more than just two straighteners. There's just more to it than that. Analogous to when you were pushing, saying I'm more than just like a tooth cleaner. I'm more than just someone who's just scaling and root planing here. I can do more with my knowledge and my degree. And then on the other side, we have people who are all in 110% on the airway side of things. And I almost felt like I kind of was almost trying to bridge that gap a little bit to say, like,
right,
we all kind of come together here. And I thought it was so productive. And I thought it was really refreshing. And this is one of the reasons people who've seen me interact online and in the ortho social media groups, I oftentimes challenge people who think differently than me to I probably shouldn't call it a debate. I should call it a discussion where we can just
healthy conflict. Remember, that's how I prefaced it. You want to have conflict because that's the only way you're going to get expansion is through healthy conflict with it and vulnerability to do that, the space to do that.
And you did an awesome job in the beginning, laying down the ground rules and like, hey, this is how we're going to do things. And because we all can get a little heated when we're so passionate about these things. And I find online, sadly, the people that are sitting online and just typing posts or quoting one article here with some random reference and fighting for it, when I question or ask them to have an open conversation on it, they don't want to. And this weekend was the epitome of why sitting down with a group of, I won't even say like-minded. I mean, I think in the end we are, but we were very different in our ideas on this. We all grew so much out of that and respected one another. And when you're online on social media and someone says something, it devolves so quickly. The interactions that I had with some people, Ben and I were really having I feel really great spirited interactions.
Me too. I loved it.
Can you imagine if that was online?
No.
It never would have happened. And Ben afterwards and I were shaking hands and, like, hey, my brother, like, it's good. Like, this is what we need to do. That sort of interaction needs to happen more. So I'll just leave it at that we need to start to focus more on the getting out there and facing one another face to face in these types of meetings, which I give you so much credit for organizing. What do you think what was your purpose going into the meeting and what do you think came out of it?
So my purpose, I just had this phrase, you have a resolution for the year. It wasn't really a resolution. It was more like an aspiration. It's just stronger together. That was just coming over my head, over and over in my head. And also with Dave McCarty, who I became good friends with after.
He's amazing, by the way.
Yeah. And also Kevin Boyd saying,
who's also
I'll
amazing.
Start with Kevin. He was saying, Dr. Kevin Boyd was saying to me, Lauren, he's like, I have a good 10 years left, because he's going to be 70. Yeah. I think it's longer than that, but he's giving himself 10 years. And he goes, if we don't make a difference, a real difference, and really help the trajectory of children's lives, it goes, shame on us. And when he said that to me, it's like, he lit a fire in me. Yeah. And then my conversations with Dr. Dave McCarty saying, and Ellen Stothard, the PhD, where we have an obligation as clinicians to document and to have the research. Yes. So between those two messages of stronger together and research, that's where I approached Dr. Stanley Liu to help me moderate this. To really, the goal is to have more synchronicity in the assessments and the screening tools so we can produce valid research papers. And there's a lot that we can do together. I mean, we all have these wonderful cases. We just need to document them, and we need to be thoughtful about how we're documenting them. Yes. And will this speak to the medical and the orthodontic language or relate to them in a way that's reputable? And so we can say, hey, these are the papers. And if we can produce that over the next 10 years, then I feel like I really will make a dent in this space for sure.
I completely agree. And this past weekend was the start of that. I'm confident in that. Stanley did an amazing job at moderating and bringing us together. And it was a busy, intense 2.5 days. I mean,
my agenda, when you come to one of my shows, I don't even think I gave a bathroom break. I think people were like, but it wasn't intentional. It just, the discussions were so juicy, and we're so that people were like, oh my gosh, I see people like sitting there with their legs crossed because they didn't want to leave.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it was, there were a couple of times I was like, I can't even excuse myself to run to the restroom because I don't want to miss what's going on here, which is a credit to you and the people you put together. And, good for the people who spoke, and were speaking up to. I think it's another message we need to get out there is don't be afraid to be vulnerable. You don't put it out there. We all have thoughts and beliefs on this stuff. And worst case is someone disagrees with you. But by having that back and forth constructive, respectful banter, discussion, it helps everybody start to grow. And I watched through those 3 days, everybody come from not even really knowing who each other was necessarily, all of us, to all of a sudden at the end of it, we were all like,
It was
not
like
wanting
camp.
it to, yeah, it was
like pen pals. And people don't know what that
great
is
way
either.
to say it. Yeah, right. Pen pals, like what? The text, the Snapchat, right? So that's speak to that group. But yeah, so I felt the same, and I've already before we started recording here, when we hopped on, I was telling you I've been texting with numerous people from that meeting, and that opened doors to other people and having these discussions. So one of the things we talked about was malocclusion, and I want to just talk about this for a couple minutes here. Is it was an interesting thing that came up, and I had actually thought about this until, well, the first part I'd thought about, and that is that language is very important. How we label something or what we call it is very important. What something is called brings up a lot of different feelings and emotions and memories and ideas in people's minds. And one of the words we talked about was malocclusion, right? And we talk about this, but that's Edward Engel, going back to the early 1900s. This is a term from over a century ago. And it was really interesting to hear people, especially some of the medical professionals, start talking about, why are we still just classifying all this based on the teeth, right? Overbite, overjet. Let's start to tie this all in. And that's the craniofacial respiratory dystrophy that you were referencing. And that overall bigger picture. And Dave McCarty and I were texting earlier today, and he referenced exactly that. And it's we just have to start to think about things differently. So how do you feel? I'm going to phrase it this way. What's the process look like by which we can start to get people to think differently? And I don't mean believe in the impact of ortho and airway. We can get there in a minute. Just start to think about the connection, because you've clearly had it in you from the beginning, going back 25 years ago plus, to want to make the connection between the mouth and the rest of the body. It's clearly been something in your work that you have been passionate about. How do we get people on board with that, who really just want to keep the mouth isolated?
Well, I think that if we go upstream to the root cause and until you can't ask why anymore, it really comes down to developing the jaws. If we can really capture it from zero, the Linda Dean Duru and Crystal
They
Dean
were
Duru,
amazing.
they had
Some of the stuff the Dean Durus were
wonderful
doing.
presentations.
Yeah.
And when you think about the work they're doing with these infants and prenatal guidance, they're never going to end up they're going to end up as healthy adults. They're not going to have malocclusion, or if you think about the word malocclusion, bad bite or crooked teeth, the teeth aren't even crooked. There's no such thing as a crooked tooth. There's not anatomically bent. Right.
The tooth itself is the tooth. Yeah.
Right. I mean, I've seen an anatomically bent root, but I haven't seen.
Yeah. And you can see, you can have a more altered morphology of an isolated crown.
But here we are talking about crooked teeth, and there's really no such thing. And that always kind of stuck true with my patients. They're like, oh my gosh, I'm not destined to have crooked, ugly teeth. I'm like, no, you have beautiful teeth. They're in the wrong place. So we just need to give them more space. And all of a sudden you start to unravel this through, expansive and reclining. You can actually unravel malocclusion. So I found that when we can offer patients the utmost in care, and then that can go all the way to their oral systemic health, and breathing is fundamental to health, right? And there's so much buzz about that between James Nestor's book, Breath, and just, Arianna Huffington, and, just everyone knows that we need to be nasal breathers. It's more and more popular, especially with the young moms. The new generation now is really, they're demanding this from their dentist many times. So if I can go back to my first kind of call to action that Colgate was really masterful in doing for their marketing. I remember driving in my car, and I had like the kids in the back, I'm a mom of 3, and I hear the commercial from Colgate saying, ask your dental hygienist about the correlation between periodontal disease and diabetes. And I'm like, I have no, I threw in an F-bomb there, but I have no idea, like in my head, like, I have no clue. And here now I felt like that, oh my gosh. And that's when I started exploring it. And it's pretty funny how that call to action. So I think that what Invisalign did so well in 2000 was they actually went right to the consumers. They
Yeah.
went right to the moms.
You
So,
got it.
so through these influencers and, these like tooth pillow, I'm just going to throw it out there because they're doing a wonderful job teaching the moms and dads, I'm going to say
Mm-hmm.
parents, about the benefits of nasal breathing from the get-go,
Yep.
so when does that start? Day one,
Right. And the direct to consumer, you're so right. I've often said it's funny. A lot of the people who are a lot of my colleagues, and I always say I love my profession. I think you can attest to the fact that I
Yeah,
stand up for orthodontists
I know.
from what this weekend's interactions were. I mean, I
You
stand up for,
lived and you lived through it.
and I live. I stand up for my orthodontic colleagues, and I say that not to pat myself on the back. I just think a lot of times my orthodontic colleagues look at me as kind of this traitor who's gone off and is kind of just trying to stray outside the profession. Look, I stand up for my orthodontic colleagues. I am a big believer that if we, and I should say when we, start to shift this pendulum, the orthodontic community is essential to it. That's why I fight so hard. The orthodontic residents I train, whether it's directly residents that I teach directly or virtually, residents take my course, they get it. They see it. They get it. And it's amazing. Just to your point, they see this because they start to put all those pieces together. They have all the knowledge. They've got amazing training in craniofacial growth and development. It's just, we're taught all that. And then we're taught in the clinic, well, you can't get to them early because of the system, and goes beyond today's discussion as to why that is, but you can't get to them early. So, you just kind of wait. And once they're getting a little older and the adult teeth are in, then you try to clean it up. And that gets really, to me, the fundamental crux of what we have to do differently. And then to your point of the direct to consumer, I feel like that I don't think that's going to get driven by the schools. There's a lot of reasons for it. I'd like to be wrong, but just in my experiences, I don't think you're going to see that as a top down. I don't think you're going to see that out of the AAO necessarily top down. I think that's going to have to be grassroots, direct to consumer, bottom up. And that long story I just told that started with a lot of those colleagues that say to me, my orthodontic colleagues, where the double-blind and randomized control trials, et cetera, they were throwing Invisalign in people's mouths without any of that because the public demanded it, and the general dentist started doing it when they didn't. And at the end of the day, people can say whatever. They message me in the show notes if you want. You can email me if you disagree with me. That being said, I know a lot of people who are very opposed to anything related to airway or earlier treatment who were more than fine with starting aligner cases before there was really any evidence out there, just because of the pressures. Would you agree with that?
I would absolutely agree with that. But then then be the parent that Googles the AAO and when is the best time for their child to see an orthodontist. And as you mentioned in your last podcast, it is misleading because it says up to the age of 7, not at 7. But if you continue reading, it shows different techniques and methodology for them to utilize to get their children into the best occlusal health, so to speak. But they don't list anything about expanders. They don't list anything about myofunctional therapy. They don't list myofunctional appliance guides. It's surgery is one of the options. Braces is one of the options.
They even, I think, mention don't they mention like teeth may need to be pulled? Don't they say something about that too?
Yeah,
I recall it's been a while.
Very high level, like just trying to pretend a parent. But I also noticed that they says if something looks iffy, and then they list things, and one of them is mouth breathing. So, Dr. DeLuca, I'm curious from your standpoint as an orthodontist, when they say mouth breathing, and we know how many children do, then it's on the AAO website. When they go to their orthodontist and say, yeah, Charlie is 2 and is mouth breathing, the orthodontist is not equipped. So it's sad because I think that there is such an opportunity through academia to equip them, because they're telling the parents to see your orthodontist, and they listed mouth breathing as one of the signs.
No, we're not equipped. We're not even trained how to ask the questions. We don't have a standardized sleep questionnaire that is done as a part. I mean, the ADA calls on us to recognize this, and we're not doing it. I mean, a lot of my colleagues like to quote and reference the 2019 AAO white paper, which has some good parts of it. It has some very bad parts of it. And ultimately they didn't stand in line with the ADA. these patients should be seen earlier and that we should be noticing and recognizing these breathing issues earlier. And then they basically said the orthodontist's job is that when we do see it, we recognize it and we refer it to our medical colleagues and let the medical colleagues tell us what treatment needs to be done. Well,
right.
talk to the pediatrician. They're like, my job's not to tell the orthodontist what to do. That's not my place. Just like they don't want us telling them what to do. So
exactly.
The AAO has to step up on this. As far as the school side and us not being trained in it, you're 110% right. I've theorized on that, but a big part of it is we just don't treat young kids in our residencies, and people don't realize that. You don't treat young kids in an orthodontic residency by and large. I'm not saying there's no exceptions out there, but the vast majority, I'd be willing to guess maybe 95%, if not greater, of the orthodontic residents graduate from their programs never having treated a child under the age, well, let's say this, treating 5 or fewer cases under the age of 10. And of that, probably none of those were under the age of 6 or 7. And so they're not comfortable with it. They don't know how to do it. We are taught that you can do things at that age because the literature is there. The data are there. I mean, we have articles we read Coracini and Harvold and McNamara. We read all that stuff in our residencies. So we know it. We just don't have an opportunity to deliver it because the system is broken. So when you're trained for 3 years, 2 to 3 years of a residency on the didactic side of the content, but then all the delivery is tooth-based. All the delivery is tooth-based because insurance won't cover, Medicaid won't cover us to treat these kids young unless they have here we go again, malocclusion that they deem to be what they call handicapping. It's based off the Salzman Index in the 1960s. That's the index we're using today, is an index from the 60s to judge whether or not these patients should get treated. So what happens? We might see them at 6 or 7 for a screening, maybe 8 even, not 3 to 2 to 4, 5, not even close. But we might see them at that age. But if they don't have the right criteria, we throw them into the watchful waiting category. And then we have to try to clean it up when they're older and all the adult teeth come in. Because at that point, the scoring index will cover them. So Medicaid will pay for us to go send this patient for extractions. They'll pay for like holding arches, like a Nance or lingual holding arch, but they won't pay for interceptive proactive treatment to try to grow the jaws. So back to your initial question about airway, it's not even on our radar. That scoring index says nothing about soft tissue. I don't think. I haven't looked in a while, but you need like 26 points or whatever to score high enough. I don't think there's anything about soft tissue, airway, tongue space. I mean, it's not there. Palatal vault shape, molar width. That's not part of it. So part of my mission, you're talking about your bigger picture mission. Part of my bigger picture mission is to redefine how we screen these patients, which is going to be a sort of Herculean effort because that gets into the politics of it. We've got to get into money and public funds. So, I mean, this is a lot more than just having the schools, but that's why when I'm critical of the schools, it's not that I'm pointing the finger. I'm not. They're a victim of the system. They can, most of the patients that go to these residencies are on state funding. And a lot of these places, they're in bigger cities. So they have to do what can get covered, and what gets covered, pulling teeth and straightening them the best you can when they're older. So
that's where the research will come into hand to measure, right?
Yes.
That's where you can have some validation of that for the financial aspect, that they will cost less, these patients that are treated earlier to the healthcare system.
Thank you. You're such a thinker. What are your thoughts on how do we get the research? Yes, which we talked a lot about.
I think that's the first step. And then, I would have to, like Ms. Magoo, I have to take that first step and then see where it leads me, to have other people, another superhero that comes up with, the public kind of relations or I don't know, to take this to, that's not my forte, is the politics of it, but you never know,
Right.
Know.
Hey,
maybe it is. I just don't know it yet.
You've had a lot of people just mention random things to you that end up. So here you go. I'm putting it out there in the universe.
Exactly.
That you're gonna have to.
Public health, public policy is not my thing, but maybe the keyword is yet. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I do want to say one thing. When you say wait and watch, to me, it's like a buzzword for wait and you're wasting time.
Yes,
it's like
I agree.
You're watching and wasting time, because Kevin Boyd said this, a distal step will always result in a class 2.
Yeah, McNamara, I think it was 1981. McNamara had a paper.
But when they think about that, when can you say always in literature? When
Right,
can
right.
you can't always say always. In
Yep.
fact, it's you
Right. You
rarely.
can
It's
almost never say always. Right. I agree.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. So I mean, just there is the science there that this will not self-correct. And
Yeah.
one of the things that we led to at the leadership summit was that if we know we have something in stage 1, why are we going to wait to treat to stage 4? And you can
Right.
put that as cancer, as failure, whatever analogy you want to use. But if you see something at stage 1 at age 2, why wait to treat?
Yeah.
It's waiting and wasting. That's how I feel.
A lot of times in my profession, we judge everything. This is my big criticism of the AO white paper. It's all about OSA. It's all about obstructive sleep apnea, which is end stage disease, number one. Number two, it's very hard to detect in the pediatric population. As I've said many times, people, I mean, I had someone on online recently was talking about that won't listen to any data or literature that doesn't show a so statistically significant improvement in OSA in the children. And I've said to this individual before, do you even realize how the OSA scale was created? I mean, we had guys in the room this weekend who knew Christian Gimeno, like
Yeah.
personally,
Mm-hmm.
and they
Right.
knew that he created this
Firsthand.
scale and regretted it because it was not based off of data. It was not based off of randomized control trials. It was an extrapolation of the adult data. So they take what we know about adults and they conflate it with kids. They make this all about OSA. And as Ben eloquently explained, OSA is end stage disease. It's like stage 4 cancer, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we see mouth breathing and this altered craniofacial growth and development or alteration of the craniofacial respiratory complex when they're younger. And as he said, why would we let this person go and just be like, oh yeah, I know you've got stage 1 cancer, you've got your early onset diabetes, or you're pre-diabetic, right? We'll kind of wait and watch and see. Hopefully, don't change anything, but hopefully it'll work out well when we have the data and literature from an evolutionary, or excuse me, from a scientific standpoint, from like Harvold and his studies with the rhesus monkeys, looking at silicone plugs in their noses and watching how it totally transformed their growth into exactly what we see happen with our pediatric patients. So I feel like that's back to the language thing, right?
Yes.
We have to redefine these terms. And a lecture I'm giving at the Winds of Change meeting coming up in St. Louis in January is going to be talking a lot about pediatric sleep disordered breathing. That's the point of it. And the 5 things that every practitioner needs to know, because the orthodontic community, we don't even know the difference between sleep disordered breathing and obstructive sleep apnea, or how you judge these, or whether a sleep lab can give you an accurate result, et cetera, et cetera. So I do feel it's going to take a combination of all of our efforts. As you said, we've got to get and I was very vocal on this weekend, we've got to get the data. We've got to get the literature to say, hey, look, this is what is happening. The empirical evidence is great. The anecdotal evidence is great. And I'm not just saying that. It is amazing to show what we're doing for these people. We have to get at the direct to consumer, get the parents understand, educating the parents, not selling it. We're not convincing them. It's like, hey, look, there is a ton of information out there on the neurocognitive deficits and altered craniofacial growth and development that occurs when children are mouth breathing and or snoring from a young age. And so we've got to educate the lay person's community on that. We need to educate the orthodontic community on what we're actually looking at, because we're not screening for anything airway related. It's not even on our radar in our residencies, the vast majority of them.
Well, I think that's going to change with the ADA initiative, with the CGASP, with the
I hope so. Yeah,
unified
talk about that a little
screening.
blah too. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not on the task force, but I know of it. In fact, there is going to be a webinar coming up with Dr. Loria Nahidis, and she's going to explain it all, but they're looking for people to join. But basically, it's a five question questionnaire, which I actually want dental hygienists to be able to screen as well. And I actually had a conversation with Dr. Gerald Simmons, who is on that task force, before our call today, because what's on the screening, I just want to make sure that dental hygienists know how to do it, and that has to be part of academia.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with orthodontists. You just have to make sure that, they're aware and have the tools to be part of the screening process. And it's really incumbent of academia to be able to include that in part of the curriculum. So I'm excited with CGAS. I think it's going to be helpful for once it's validated to help with unified research initiatives. So that's a step in the right direction. And the fact that ADA is initiating it gives it a lot of credibility after their call to action for dentists to screen for obstructive sleep apnea in 2017. So it's a nice follow-up. At least we're moving in the right direction. I think that most people aren't aware of how they can really truly help their patients in the airway space. And I encourage everyone to learn about it. Be curious. There are a lot of resources you can find. I know your podcast is amazing. So listen to all the speakers because they all have something to share to raise awareness. It's free. You don't have to pay anything for it. Airway Health Solutions, we have archived conversations as well. Dr. DeLuke will be joining us October 23rd for a free webinar, CE webinar. So there's a lot to learn and there's a lot of hidden resources that everyone can just kind of do at their own time and take in. Sometimes it's overwhelming because what you realize to be true may not be true. It's almost like you're in a thriller movie and you're rooting for this guy, and then all of a sudden he becomes, the villain. What was that movie with Leonardo DiCaprio where it's Shutter Island?
Oh yeah.
Okay. But it's like one of those plot twists.
Yes,
and
right.
you have to be really careful of. And Dr. Bill Hang, he did an excellent masterclass for me on mental health and how that takes a toll when you think you're doing something, for the good and of everyone, and you find out it may not be the right direction. How do you cope with that? So we have to be empathetic to all of our professionals as well, that they're doing the best they can with what they know. But now I'm going to challenge everyone to be curious.
It's absolutely correct. And I'm glad you said it and Bill's amazing and his story is amazing. If you put yourself in the position, because I get asked a lot by young docs, why aren't we doing it this way? Why are we being taught differently? They almost feel betrayed a little bit. I get to see that sort of anger and frustration of I've spent all this time learning this. And now I'm seeing when they see some of my content or start to learn about this and they say, why did nobody teach us this? It's a really good point what you just said. And that is, this isn't comfortable to change at this magnitude. We're talking about multiple levels of change. One is changing your entire mindset. That's never easy with anything. Second is looking back at a reflective body of work, which is why I think this is a lot easier for younger docs to embrace. I mean, it's hard for anybody when you show them the data and the evidence to ignore it. They can put their head in the sand on it, but it's I'm sure some people would. But ultimately, when you show people what's going on, it's hard to ignore it. It's also really hard for people to look back at 10, 20, 30, 40 years of work and think that they were failing their patients in some capacity. And what I say to that is, as you said, just show a little bit of kindness and grace and say, we didn't know better. This is what you were taught. It's okay. We even talked about that as a group this weekend is we have to be willing to say to the profession, especially the orthodontic profession, up until now, fine. We were where we were. It's time to change. And I know there are people worried about liability. Like if they start to say, are the, people who are an airway going to try to make it that patients sue? No, that the point is everyone that I've spoken with, especially at this leadership summit, we're all saying, we're not looking to try to indict the orthodontists or make it out like they, should regret everything they did. It's to say, this is the way the profession has gone, did the best we could. It's time to do better. But that is not an easy thing to do for people. No. And then the last step is now you've got to incorporate. So say you get through all that. Now you've got to incorporate all these new systems and techniques into your practice and change your diagnostic process, your consultation process, your clinical delivery process. It's not easy. I've done it. No. I know it's not easy. Yeah. So there's a lot of hurdles there. And I think that's why we sense such vehement resistance to a lot of this is that magnitude of change, conceptual and execution of it in the delivery of the care can really, really be overwhelming.
On the flip side of that, because there always is the juiciness of it, of how you can then really dive right in and dare to be different and dare to explore and have that tremendous gratitude of being truly the healthcare advocate for your patient and seeing those young ones, their lives change, because there's nothing more gratifying.
Nothing.
I've seen
Nothing.
this all from the alumni from Airway Health Solutions, that they all come back and it literally changed their practice. Dr.
Yes.
Jenna Schwibner, Dr. Scott Province, these stories that everyone can be one of these stories.
Yes.
It takes some grit, and I think people don't maybe give themselves enough credit that the grit's there. Just
Yeah.
kind of lean into it.
Yeah. I've said that often, that once you experience one time, it just takes once that a parent says, you saved my child, you changed my child. They are no longer, and again, I always say this part, I'm not saying that we treat OSA. I'm not saying we diagnose airway. I'm saying that when you recognize the signs and symptoms of a child who is struggling to breathe through their nose, and you get that child the appropriate care, of which orthodontics can play a role. There's much more to it than that. It's not the scope of today's episode. That when you do all those things, you many times change the life of that child and that family, and they are eternally grateful. And absolutely. I say so often, I straightened a lot of teeth in my day and created a lot of very beautiful smiles, and I'm very proud of that. That being said, none of it spoke to me and touched me at my core like those families that, a mom just breaks down in tears, a dad, some burly like dad is just kind of like not, doesn't really get into the whole side of what his son's doing in orthodontia, and all of a sudden is like, you changed my boy. Like, this is like, he couldn't read well, he was struggling, he was socially having problems, all of these things, and now he's different. So I'm so glad you said that part of it, because I can say from someone who's done it, I had to question my whole reality of everything I'd learned and been taught. Yeah. I had to change my entire practice. I had to change all my systems, all my strategies. I had to learn a whole new technology and technique of treating patients and patient care. It was worth every single second of it. And it's why I wouldn't be here right now having this conversation.
Nope. And touching the lives and paying it forward. That's everyone can pay it forward, and it's the patients who benefit. So we all have the same common goal. That's why we became healthcare professionals, right? When we didn't go into accounting, right? We wanted to, help people. I mean, if you think about your 18-year-old self when you chose this profession, what was it? People wanted to care about their patients. So this is the ultimate patient care, I believe, and it's the last why that you can get to, and it's the most rewarding for sure.
Yeah, so well said. As we kind of wrap up here, let's talk to me a little bit about one thing I'm also very interested in, is the challenge that females in the workplace face as moms. I mean, dads, we face it in some degree. It's different. It's different. I've seen it from my own wife, from many females that I know and have coached and worked with, and residents I've trained over the years. It's not easy. So talk to me. You have 3 kids, going back to the 90s here. You're trying to build your career. And then as you're building and going through all these changes and growing your career, you've got 3 little ones growing into big ones at home. So what are your kids' ages now, if you don't mind me asking? And how did you?
Yeah, so I have a 29, 27, 23-year-old. And I always wanted, I was kind of an anomaly back in 1987, where people asked me what I want to be when I grow up. And I was like, a mom is really, I just really love kids and just wanted to really be a great mom, but also have a career. So that's why dental hygiene fit in, and the dental road really didn't, because the balance wouldn't have been there. So also I wanted them to have a role model of having your own separate dharma, if you would, your own purpose, where my identity is not only being their mom. And I evolved, from being 18, wanting to be a mom, to really contributing to society, was really important, I think, for my overall growth and development. And then for me to be a role model to my children, I had to model something, right? Not just being their mom. So, for me, it was part of just my calling to help people from 4 years old. What do you want to be when you grow up? And my answer was a helper, that they could see that to come into play, right? And there were challenging times. I'm on my second marriage now. I was divorced with 3 young kids. When I got divorced, they were 4, 6, and 9. And so when I met my second husband, he got the bonus package of a 6, 9, and 11-year-old. We were kind of a family deal. But just how can I say? It's just showing up every day for yourself first. You have to put the oxygen mask on first. You
Mm-hmm.
have to have your own purpose, your own sense of self, your own kind of time to take a breath, whether that's going to a yoga class, taking a walk around the block, but doing something for yourself. And I say this now, but in retrospect, I don't know how I did it, to be honest with you. I was kind of in that in between generation when my father passed away at 59 from diabetes complications. So that really drew me into that whole diabetes experience. But being pregnant and seeing a sick father and working all in between, you just show up, you just do it. And sometimes you just feel like you're hanging on for dear life and you're always one step behind, but somehow it always works out in the end and you learn valuable lessons. You become to rely on yourself. If there's a problem, I always come up, well, what are we going to do about it? I taught that to my kids firsthand.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can tell me your problem, but the next question always is, what are you going to do about it?
Mm-hmm.
Let's not dwell in the muckety muck of the problem. What are you going to do about it? Use your voice. It matters. So if I can emulate that to my kids, then I feel like I did a good job as being a mom and a human being,
I love
So
it.
I don't know if you want to get into more of the details of the stuff. There's a funny story that I actually have. It's featured in the Do magazine where my babysitter didn't show up one day and I had patients scheduled and we were on a tight schedule. So they were like 6 months out. And so I brought them with me and I have 3 kids and there's a picture in the article where it looks like my daughter's giving me the finger with her glove, but she's
Glove, yeah.
not. It's kind of funny. But, as I'm seeing patients, my daughter what the had an accident in the waiting room
Oh,
as I'm
goodness.
with patients. And I have my other son like climbing up the walls because he has ADD that he's now in expansion for. It's kind of like an S show, you know what I mean?
Yep.
And sometimes when I look back at it now, don't take everything so seriously. It happens. You just kind of roll with it. And sometimes you can just sit back and kind of laugh at it about how the stuff that you have to deal with, but you do get through it. And it's nice to have a support system as well.
Yeah. Well, you've done an amazing job. And
Thank
it's
you.
it's really cool to see where you are and who you are. And you're just, I want to really just acknowledge you for what you're doing and your persistence, your dedication, your positivity, and always trying to lift others around you up with a greater goal in mind. You do a really great job of it. And you've done
Thank
great
you.
things through, you're welcome. You've done great things through your career and you're going to keep doing great things. You have a lot of time left to do this. And I'm confident that whatever you put your mind to, you are going to be able to achieve. And it may change from time to time as it has. The
Exactly.
cool part is
Plan
that
on
you
being surprised. But just to kind of wrap up the story with the kids coming in, where now I have the Airway Palooza, which is it's about 18 months apart. This will be our 3rd one coming up, but
can.
they're my event team. So,
Oh,
I
really? Oh my
don't
gosh.
pay an event person $30,000 to run it. It's okay, payback. So now they show up for me, and it's a family affair, and
Oh, that's
it's really
cool.
kind of a nice full circle where they're not too busy. They wouldn't dream of missing it.
Oh,
So
that's so fun.
they show up for me now, which is really really special.
Well, it's a credit to the relationship you built, even through some challenging times and through the divorces you said, and the career changes that you were there for them as their mom, and they obviously want to stay in your circle
Yeah,
now. So, how can people reach you, and what anything you want
sure.
to let them know as far as resources they can use to try to learn a little bit about your platform and what you guys do?
Sure. Our website's airwayhealthsolutions.com. You can look at courses if you're interested. Either, we have an intro course. So if you're just airway curious, there's a nice intro course for you there. Or if you're airway experienced, we have advanced course tracks as well. But I really encourage everyone to go to the free resources because there's so many. I said we have the archived conversations on our website. Children's Airway First Foundation has a great website. It's children'sairwayfirst.org. And they have great resources. Tooth Pillow has great resources. It's all free. So just learn more, be curious, and you'll be surprised at how you can make a difference.
Yeah, I echo that. Just start going. I'll put some links in the show notes as
Sure.
well for people because that's well said. Just be curious. Just go, keep an open mind, and just start to hear a different point of view that you may never have heard before. and you may not have another opportunity in another arena to hear. So just start to go in there, play around on the site, and start to listen to some different opinions.
To close out how I opened up the Leadership Summit was that you can't be judgmental and curious at the same time. So our first instinct is to be judgmental. I mean, it's our ego is there to protect us, right? It's a protective mechanism. But if you can be aware of that feeling where you're kind of digging in, or maybe you get a little tense, that's probably the judgmental side. If you can just open that up and let curiosity come in, you'll learn a lot more and you'll actually feel better. You won't be so tense. And so you can kind of allow for some movement and some space and some expansion as a human being.
I'm going to let that close it, because that was absolutely outstanding.
Okay.
Lorne Golub, man, I really enjoyed this. I really did.
Too.
Thank you for your time and for taking the time and for being vulnerable and letting people know some of your ups and downs throughout your career. That's really courageous of you, and really appreciate you sharing that with the audience.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. And this is a highlight for me.
Thank you. Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Doc Podcast. Be sure to visit theorthocoach.com to get access to ADA CERP recognized CE courses, or to schedule a private one-on-one coaching session with me. Also, if you know of someone who would make a great guest for this show, or if you'd like to be a guest yourself, please email me at drmike@theorthocoach.com. And be sure to join the Doc community on Facebook for more great content. Thanks so much for listening, and always remember, you have been blessed with the ability to do amazing things.